Seema Katecha, BBC News.
I've been speaking to JohnOBrien, who worked at the UN Development Programme for 3 years before flagging his concerns about corruption with managers. The UN thanked him for raising the complaints, but subsequently opened an investigation into him. The UN denies John's allegations of retaliation. They say they are without merit. But I asked him about the culture at the organisation.
The culture is a culture of fear. I describe it in the documentary as the majority of staff are like ostriches with their head in the sand. And the majority of staff, when you tell them about corruption allegations, they suddenly go deaf. They don't want to hear about it. And they try to brush it aside. So in Russia, I raised concerns over 10 years ago. And as I say in the documentary, I was so concerned I didn't approve the budget one year. And I was overruled by a senior official. I was told never to do that again if I want a future in UNDP. Basically, UNDP is a rules-based organization that doesn't follow its own rules a lot of the time. And people are scared stiff to report corruption because there's no support in the senior management, and nothing has changed, even though they say they're trying to fix it, because you cannot fix it unless you have transparency and accountability, and unless staff feel like they're going to be protected. So that's how many whistleblowers do you think UNDP protected in 2020? None, as in zero. So they always go out of their way, and I talk about this in the documentary, to discredit the whistleblower and come up with some trumped up charges so that the person is seen as being not credible or reliable. So in the case of Russia, they managed to find no corruption, even though the Russian government found corruption and dismissed a couple of their officials. UNDP managed to find no corruption, and both the whistleblowers on the project that was reviewed were dismissed. So the whistleblowers lost their job. No one was responsible for the corruption. And UNDP says they're fixing things. I mean, it's just an absolute joke, really.
These are incredibly serious allegations you're making, and the UNDP does dispute your account and says you were not told to keep quiet. Who do you think that ultimately is responsible for this?
The senior management, because they
right
need to be
at the
held
top.
accountable.
Are we talking about Antonio Guterres?
Antonio Guterres needs to stand up by his own words. He said, I'm completely against harassment in the organization, and I do not want to see a single whistleblower penalized. So I'm a whistleblower who's in a public report that says my case was mishandled, and he's done nothing about it. So I've been penalized because I lost my job, and he just ignores me. So the top management are, of course, responsible. They say I wasn't told to not report corruption. In short, they lie. They just lie and lie and lie. The whole culture is one of fear, why most staff are scared to speak out. I think I was one of only 2 people in the documentary, myself and Emma Riley, who still had jobs. So we were going on there at great personal risk to ourselves. So I lost my job 5 days after UNDP found out about the BBC, and she lost her job about, I think it was 2 weeks after she did the filming.
John, Antonio Guterres says he's open to an external review to combat misconduct of any kind. Would that be a good place to start?
I would like to ask him to conduct an independent external review of my case, which was recommended in this public review done by Mr. Amitav Rath, and UNDP has ignored this for the last 18 months. So I would like to ask him on BBC to please conduct this external independent review. One of the accusations against myself was that I'd stolen money to buy an apartment in London. That can be checked. I own no property in London. I own no apartment in London. And so that can be checked. So when I ask this to UNDP, they ignore me. So their strategy is to simply ignore anything that's inconvenient. And I was the subject of about 4 years of bad faith investigations from anonymous people.
Do you think individual governments who contribute to the UN and to the UNDP specifically also have a responsibility?
Absolutely. The governments absolutely need to do a lot more. And I'd like to tell Mr. Boris Johnson and Jacinda Ardern that you need to tell your officials in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs to take this a lot more seriously. I mean, it's not okay. I got a message once from the Foreign Office in London where the official said, you need to contact the UNDP Office of Audit Investigation. Well, how does that work? They're the ones that have been guilty of having their investigations interfered with. So the conclusion of this reviewer was that my case suffered from bias, incompetence and management interference, and that I was not offered due process. And the response of UNDP to this is to ignore it and then to dismiss me. And then there are confidential reports about who is responsible for the covering up of corruption, and nobody's been dismissed. So no one's dismissed for the corruption or the cover-up. and the 2 whistleblowers lost their jobs.
Another
So
whistleblower said, Peter Gallo, told the BBC that the UN is riddled with corruption from the top to the bottom. Now, if this is to be stopped, if you step back from your case for a moment, what is the very first thing that you would call on for the UN and other individual governments to do?
The first thing governments need to do is to understand that an organisation cannot investigate itself. So they are the evaluator, the investigator, the auditor. They are the jury, the judge, and the executioner. So if you want to fix this, you need to have an external, independent investigation unit. The United Nations or the United Nations Development Programme cannot investigate itself. What happened in the Russia case is after they had this independent review, the administrator turned the job back to the Office of Audit Investigation to investigate its own misconduct. So in essence, last year they were investigating themselves. I mean, it's just not serious. So the first thing to do is to have a brand new investigation unit which is external, reports to the General Assembly or the Executive Board, and has full-time dedicated people working on the oversight function rather than part-time diplomats.
So, John, would you like your job back?
No, absolutely don't want my job back. I think I can effectuate change much better from the outside. What I'd like is the UN to be an organisation that lives up to the Charter, that protects the good guys and punishes the bad guys. And right now we have a system that is actually protecting the bad guys and getting rid of the whistleblowers who are the good guys. So that's what I would like to see happen.
JohnO'Brien, just to be clear, the UN disputes John's account of what happened, says he was never told to be quiet with his allegations. And Antonio Guterres, the UN Secretary General, has also said he is indeed open to an external review to combat misconduct of any kind. That's the response from the